Hi, this is Zena Krogadal. Thank you so much for joining me on American Dream Makers. I am your host today, and I've got Sharla Frost as our guest today, and I cannot wait to introduce her. But first, I'm going to play my intro video, so here we go. Okay, I am back. Thank you again for being here. I am Zena Krogadal. If you are watching this live, we'd love for you to let us know in the chat and please share this out. Sharla Frost is here with us today, and she is a frequent speaker for community and bar associations. Sharla Frost is a retired litigator who was repeatedly listed in the spotlight table for asbestos litigation by Chambers and Partners prior to her retirement from trial practice in 2020. A former president of Litigation Council of America, she was elected to the American Board of Trial Advocates and served on several committees for National Association of Women Lawyers, including the Committee for the Evaluation of Supreme Court Nominees. She was identified as the 2018 Houston Lawyer of the Year, Products Liability Litigation Defendant by Best Lawyers in America. She was listed as Texas Super Lawyer each year from 2004 to 2020. Since 2020, Sharla maintains a specialty practice consisting of settlement negotiations, litigation strategy, consultation, expert witness work. She is the author of Power at the Table, a women lawyer's guide to business development, and a trio of children's books called Frogville Quest series. In her spare time, she operates a cattle ranch near Frogville, Oklahoma, and with her mother and her sister. So, welcome, Sharla. We are so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for being here, Sharla. How are
Hi,
you today?
Zena. I'm good, and thank you for having me. And the introduction always makes me blush.
Well, you are a highly accomplished woman, and so I'm so glad to have been able to introduce you. But I have to say, those were some big words that were written there for someone who English is a second language. So you really challenged my reading skills. So I hope I did it justice. But anyways, thank you so much again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you are busy, even though you're retired from trial lawyering. You are busy, busy, busy. So I appreciate you taking the time out to be on American Dream Makers. So tell us about yourself, Sharla, what you are doing now and why you're doing it.
Well, as you know from the introduction, I'm a Frogvillian. I grew up near Frogville, Oklahoma. I'm a fourth generation Frogvillian on one side of the family and a fifth generation on the other. So my folks have been here for a very, very long time, but they don't speak English any better than you do. So I wouldn't be worried about that at all. I did all of my elementary and high school education in public schools at Fort Towson, Oklahoma, and then went to college at Southeastern Oklahoma State University, which is known mainly for, I like to think it's known for me, but it's known mainly for its association with Reba McEntire and Dennis Rodman, neither of whom I knew, by the way. Then I went to law school at Baylor and spent more than 30 years as an in the courtroom trial lawyer. I was the person who came in and explained to the jury why my corporate defendant either didn't do it, didn't mean to do it, or shouldn't have to pay for it because of whatever reasons were involved. And it was a great opportunity for a little kid from the sticks to be able to do that. And I really enjoyed it. But I woke up in 2020, just before the pandemic. So my timing actually worked out pretty well, and decided, I just don't want to do that anymore. I'm tired of living out of a suitcase. I was spending upwards of 300 nights a year on the road. So I was ready to do something different. And I decided I would come home spend time with the cows and the cats, as you noticed one of them in the window. And I wanted to write. I was an English major in college, and I was always a frustrated writer, as I think many English majors are. So I decided I would give that a try. And the first book was about business development for women lawyers. The advice I tell people is neither gender nor profession specific, but we expect people to develop business and don't do anything to train them to do it. So I learned by trial and error, and I'm not one of those people who thinks that everyone else has to do it that way because I did. So I wrote the book for that. And then after that, my publisher asked me if I'd ever thought about writing a children's book. And of course, my response was, nope, haven't given any thought to that at all. But those were the only things that were selling during the pandemic. So I just published the third book in the series. And that's been a really interesting process. But my friends tell me I failed retirement because I'm not very good at doing nothing. But I like to think of it as retoolement. So I've taken my toys and my abilities and put them to use doing something else.
Wow, that's great, and I'm glad that you decided to retool, because those books that you have put out, and I do find it interesting that you went from being really active in law and traveling around the country. It sounded like, to do your work, and then you wrote a book, Power at the Table, which sounds like an amazing book for lawyers, but to switch the gear and do children's books. So why is it that you had someone ask you to write a children's book? What is the background there that, because you don't think lawyer and children's book. So how did that come about?
Well, it is a fantasy that you can do business development without being trained, and children's books are fantasies. So it's all fantasy in one way or the other. It's just a different genre. And I loved fairy tales when I was a kid, so it wasn't that big a leap. But it is different, and the process is different. It's a different type of creative approach. So it's been fun. It's been nice to sort of shake out some of those old brain cells that I hadn't used in a really long time, put them to work at something different.
Okay. Wow, great. So, and that's nice that you have that creative side, and like you said, it's just kind of another way, uh, I guess, to express what you have going on, and just another way to connect with people, which is great. So I feel inspired that I suppose that just because, you're doing one thing that seems very, left brain, that you can still do right brain stuff, being creative and having fantasy. That's awesome. So what led you to become a lawyer?
Well, that's kind of a funny story. I was planning to be a secretary. My favorite aunt was a legal secretary, and she seemed to have a really cool life. She had left rural Oklahoma and gone first to Dallas and then to Chicago, and that seemed very cool to me. So I was going to be a secretary. And then my senior year in high school, we had a new principal. And it turned out he was what I called a recovering lawyer. He had been a legal practitioner and didn't like it, and went back to school, got a PhD in education, and liked teaching at small rural schools. And I know that you have some exposure to small rural schools in Oklahoma, so you have some appreciation of what that involves. And he's sat down the summer before school started and, like all lawyers, went through all the files. So he had gone through the files for all the kids who went to school there. There were approximately 200 between kindergarten and high school. So a very small school. And he called all of the juniors and seniors in during the summer and sat down and met with us. And when he met with me, he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Oh, I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a secretary." And he said, "No, no, 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 no. You're going to have a secretary. You're going to go to law school." I was like, "Well, I've never thought about going to law school, but sounds okay to me. So he taught a class for juniors and seniors that was really sort of a hybrid of the classes you would take as a first year law student. And after the first semester, he sat me down and said, okay, I'm really serious about this. What do you plan to do and how do we get you there? So that was that. I wasn't a good math science person, so that didn't appeal to me. I wasn't going to do medicine or anything like that. And writing and speaking were in my wheelhouse, so that seemed like a logical thing to do. So I was off and running and off to be a lawyer.
Wow. And it started out with somebody who believed in your abilities that really influenced you. Was he the only one that was saying those things, or were you having kind of other people around you saying, why are you just aspiring to be a secretary?
Well, you got to remember this is a very rural area. And in 1980, which seems not that long ago to me, but sounds like a long, long time ago now, there were still a lot of expectations on roles for women. And I was very fortunate. I had great teachers and mentors who were very supportive of me. And everyone expected me to go to college. But the concept of going to professional school for a first generation college student just wasn't really something I was thinking about. My dad really wanted me to be a teacher because every woman needs a teaching certificate just in case you get married and that thing doesn't work out. So you need to support yourself. In fact, one of the only fights he and I ever got into, he wanted me to get a teaching certificate. And I was in college at the time, and I was on an academic scholarship, so I could take anything I wanted. And they were very generous about that. And they would have let me take education classes, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I was happy being an English major. And by that point, pretty committed to the idea of going into litigation because I had begun to debate in college and I really liked it. It was life changing for me. So uh, those other things were no longer an option. But I was very fortunate that I always had people who were supportive, both male and female. I made good grades. I was a smart kid, so I needed to go do something. And they didn't know what that meant, but they encouraged me to go do something out of my comfort zone.
Wow, that is fantastic that you had that kind of support. And so you are the first generation of your family that went to college. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Wow,
correct.
they must
Yeah.
have been so proud of you. And not only did you just go to college, you went and got a law degree. I mean, that's
Yes,
tough.
my sister and I both. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So she had always wanted to be a lawyer from the time she was in first grade. But yes, our parents were very determined. It was never a question of if we were going to college. The discussion was always, when you go to college, this is what you're going to do. So that was ingrained from the beginning. They
And
should,
so
both of them should have gone to college, but didn't have the opportunity. So they were not letting that happen to the next group.
that's great. So your sister is also a lawyer
She
as well?
is. Yeah.
Wow.
And
So two women.
we practiced as partners for more than 20 years. We've worked and we still work together on various projects now that we're both sort of retooled.
Wow. And so what was that like working with your sister? Growing up with your sister and then working with your sister?
Yeah, we're 4 years apart, and our legal experience was somewhat different. We went to different law schools. We had different majors. I always told my parents that they had one kid who could read and one who could add. That wasn't exactly true, but she is mathematically and engineering inclined, so she has that sort of structured mind, and I don't. And so her experience in practicing law was much more focused on case workup and organization and strategy and so on. And mine was in the courtroom, talking with jurors and trying to convince judges to my position.
That's great. Well, I'm glad that you guys got along well and that you accentuated each other's positives, it sounds like. So that's always a plus. And to have it be your sister, how cool is that? That you got to really spend your careers together as well.
Yes,
So,
we're one of the few sister pairs to practice law together in Texas. In fact, Texas Monthly did a really cool profile on us a couple of years ago, which was just a lot of fun.
so where in Texas did you reside mainly or practice mainly?
Houston, and I still maintain my residence in Houston. We spend time between Houston and Oklahoma and wherever else. As you pointed out earlier, my practice was a national practice. So I was in a courtroom a little bit of everywhere, but I had not tried a case in Texas for probably 15 years at the time I retired. So my practice was unusual in that aspect as well.
So your specialty in your practice, it sounded like there was actually quite a few things that you did in your practice, but you also had a niche as well.
I did. My niche was products liability with a specialty in toxic exposure cases, really asbestos, silica, talc, anything that you can inhale a lot of. That was the sort of case that I handled and defended for a variety of corporate manufacturers. So it was a wonderful opportunity because I was one of the few women in the actual first chair trial position in those cases. There's a handful of us around the country, and we all know each other. But yeah, I can bore you to tears with the mineralogy of asbestiform and elongate minerals, should you ever need a reason to go to sleep.
Okay. So when you became an attorney, when you and your sister both became an attorney, you were talking about how in the 80s there wasn't a lot of opportunities for women, i- in the area that you were growing up in. And so when you went to law school, were there other women as well in your
Oh,
class?
yeah, there were a lot. In fact, my law school class at Baylor had the distinction of being the first class that was more women than men. We had, I believe, 51% women in our class. So that was sort of the turning point. And if you read my book, Power at the Table, it has a lot of demographic information in it. But law school graduating classes have been more than 50% women since the late 70s. So a lot of women in the profession. And the profession has changed in the way that it incorporates women over this last 40 years or so.
Wow, that's great that you got to be part of that. I guess breaking through that stereo or limitations, I would say, from previous when there wasn't as many women, and now you're saying that was kind of the first of having a bigger class that was women versus men, and then in the future, I mean, as we are here presently, is that correct?
Yeah, there's still probably most classes are about 50-50. And it, by the time I started law school, the change had already well begun. There's some amazing women lawyers and women litigators in the generation just older than me. And they not only blazed the path for the rest of us, but they've been tremendously supportive, both on an individual basis and a professional basis. There is one of the most fun groups that I'm a member of is the women. The American Board of Trial Advocates. So everyone refers to that as ABOTA. Well, sometime back, some friends of mine decided that since Houston had the largest percentage of women of any ABOTA chapter in the country, a whopping 9%, that we needed a WABOTA chapter, Women of ABOTA. And they are the leaders of that group are women who now are, many of them are retired from active practice, but they are judges. They were judges. They do mediation. They are just a wonderful group of women who really changed the shape of the profession. And they were helpful to those of us who were coming along when we got out of law school, because they were willing to mentor people and to assist and to occasionally give us the reality check that this is a tough profession. So sometimes it's just not very easy. And that's helpful too. Sometimes you need that dose of practical advice, which is the life isn't all roses. So keep at it. It'll be okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep at it. It will be okay. That's
Yes.
good. Simple and good. So when you go to law school, how much, how many classes or how much um, education do you have on running a business? Because you came out and you also ended up running a practice with your sister. So how much business education was there?
Well, at the time, there was none. And I've got to tell you that first report that we got uh, from the outside payroll service, it came on this very long paper as a big graph thing. And I literally took it and went, okay, does it go this way or does it go this way? I have no idea. But I had gone into partnership with a friend of mine from the third law firm that I was at, because I rapidly discovered that law firms are not always easy and they're not always a very good fit. I tell people it's like blind dates, except that they involve money and your future, and sometimes they just don't work out very well. But my longtime partner, Jim Powers, and I had started a firm together, and he was my rock star because he was on the road trying cases every Monday. And I was not yet in that rotation. I had tried a lot of cases, but the clients were not yet comfortable with letting me do the first chair work. So I was running the firm, making sure we kept the lights on, which was a bit of a struggle at the beginning because we were running it on my credit card and the promise from his clients that they were going to pay us soon. But I didn't have any background in that. And likewise, one of the reasons I wrote Power at the Table was I didn't have any background in client development either, because they didn't teach that in law school at the time. I understand that they do a little bit better now because it has become very obvious to everyone that no matter what profession you're in, you need to understand the basics of the business. What do you do for a line of credit? How do you go about getting a banker? If you need a real estate lease, what do you do? What do you need to consider? How do you hire people? How do you fire people? What do you need for insurance? Those were things that were all new to me, and they just took a lot of learning. And I approached it like I approach a case. I knew I didn't know how to do any of that stuff, so I interviewed people. I called my accountant and said, come explain this to me. I don't understand how this profit and loss thing works. So I did that. I did a lot of reading, and I continued to work at it. And I still remember a friend of mine had told me, very good buddy of mine from law school, he had opened a firm shortly before we did. And he said, you're going to find this administrative stuff really takes a lot of time. So about 6 months in, I called him and I said, you are a liar. And he said, in perfect lawyer response, about what? I said, well, you told me this administrative stuff was going to take a lot of time. And that's not true. It's taking all of my time. He was like, well, again, it was practical advice again. It's like, yeah, it'll get better. Yeah, you get used to it. And he was right. But it would have, if I had something to do over again, not one of these people who sits around thinking about what would I do if I could live my life again, but if I could do that, I would have taken computer classes because I didn't do that in college. And I would have taken some basic business courses because I really needed that. That would have made my life a lot easier. So I
Yes.
recommend to anyone who's going to go into business or be an entrepreneur or just live, take a couple of business classes.
That's great advice. So, are there business consulting companies that focus just for lawyers, for attorneys? I know
Oh,
in
yeah.
dentistry we have that. So, yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are a herd of them, and some of them are really good, and some of them aren't. They're like all other service groups, but there are some very good ones out there that can provide that sort of basic instruction and background. I worked with a group, John Rimsom's practice management group, and I'm pulling a blank. He'll shoot me that I'm not remembering the exact name of his organization, but it was Managing Partners Group. They were really terrific. He was lovely, and he provided speakers and resources and lots of materials to assist with managing the firm. And that role is typically called a managing partner. And most firms expect the managing partner to both practice law and generate income and do all the administrative work as well. So it's a real balancing act to do that.
Yes. And so, how big was your practice? You and your sister. Was there another attorney as well?
We were at 50 lawyers actually before tort reform slammed through Texas and slammed us down. But we grew over time. We were specialty shops, so we did almost exclusively litigation. We did very, very little else. And we managed cases throughout the state of Texas. So we literally had thousands of cases, and we had people in courtrooms essentially every Monday. Some Mondays not, but most Mondays, yes.
That's a very big practice that you had for sure. Then lot
Yeah.
of moving parts, a lot of people to keep tabs on.
Well, yes, because we had 50 lawyers and more than 50 staff people, because of course you need secretarial support, file support, and accounting support, and all of the things that you need to run a business. So it was a big organization. And then, of course, tort reform happened and nobody needed us in Texas anymore. And so we went from 50 down to 8, and then we didn't merge. We were hired as a group by an 800 lawyer law firm and worked there for a while. Went from there to a Midwest firm that was a smaller group, and that's where I retired from.
So, for those that may not know that are watching, for those that do not know what tort reform is, can you give us I guess, a brief summary of what that is?
Sure. I forget that not everybody speaks legalese. In Texas and in many states around the country over the last probably 15 to 20 years, legislation has been passed to limit the amount of damages that a plaintiff can recover in personal injury litigation. It was driven in large part in Texas by medical malpractice verdicts. So you read about verdicts where everyone's familiar with the McDonald's coffee verdict, where the lady got hot coffee on her and recovered millions and millions and millions of dollars. That was the concept, that jurors were a little bit too generous with the money that they awarded to people, and that people were not honest about what their injuries were. So legislation was passed to limit the litigation. And even though it was focused on medical malpractice in Texas, it had a spillover effect that it affected all types of personal injury litigation. So for the type of work that we were doing, which was asbestos exposure, silica exposure, things like that, where there are literally thousands of claims filed in a year, there was no longer a desire to file those claims in Texas, because there were other jurisdictions where plaintiff's counsel could file those cases and get larger demands, larger recoveries, and they could probably get to trial more quickly, because tort reform not only changed the damage model, the amount that people could get, but it also affected some of the procedural ways that a case actually gets to trial. So it was really a sea change in the way that litigation happened in Texas.
Got it. Got it. So yes, so I guess that would have affected the industry.
It
For
did.
yeah, yeah. So so now that you're retired, quote unquote, um, what do you like to do for fun besides work?
I'm not very good at not working, but I garden. I love flowers. I'm not a very talented gardener when it comes to anything you can eat. I seem to routinely fail at vegetable gardening, but I do that. I consider the writing to be a relaxing hobby. So that is something that I do. I do some community charity work. I help with the food giveaways at Fort Towson, which is the little community where I grew up when I was young. So I do some of that. I do, I read. I've been doing things with the Turn It Up crowd, which is where I met you. I have found a whole new group of people who, like me, enjoy speaking and writing and socializing. So that's fun. And when I'm in Houston, I spend a lot of time socializing. I love to eat. So we do the restaurant tour every time we're in town. And I still have a lot of friends from legal practice who are located in Houston. So I spend more time socializing with them, because that's something I did not have the opportunity to do all those years when I was on the road. So those things have been wonderful experiences for me in this post litigation phase of my life.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you're finding some time to have some fun in there. So you're speaking and you're writing. Mainly, is that what you're doing right now, being retired?
I do that. I still do some legal work. I specialize in settlement negotiations. So I do settlement negotiations for some corporate clients, many of them in the toxic tort arena, relying on my experience having done trials. I'm pretty good at eyeballing a case and saying, that one's good, or that one's not so good. That one's expensive. That one's not so expensive. So I still spend quite a lot of time doing that. I do some expert witness work, which has been fascinating, because I was the one who always asked the questions. Now I'm the one who's answering the questions. That is a different part of legal work, but that's been very interesting, very gratifying. People call and say, "We would like to know what your opinion is." It's like, okay, I always have an opinion. So that's been interesting. And then on the speaking and writing side, I do some keynote speaking. I do some speaking for schools. I tend to do that on a pro bono basis, because I think it's important. When I was a kid at Fort Towson Public Schools, and we did not have a budget for things like speakers, we still had a lot of people who came and spoke to us about a whole variety of things. So I think it's important to give back in that way. Then I do a little bit of coaching. I'm always happy to sit down with a young lawyer and say, let's talk about what it is that you're doing and where you're doing it and how it's meeting your needs and whether you're meeting their needs, because it needs to be a symbiotic relationship. And I also do some coaching as it relates to business development in the legal setting and otherwise, because the concepts are really very, very similar. You have to be persistent. You have to have something to sell. You have to be able to bring value to the people that you're working with, because at the end of the day, if you're not bringing them value, they're never going to hire you. It doesn't matter what it is that you do or how you do it. So all of that has been depends on the day. So some days it's more law, less speaking. Some days it's more speaking, less law. So that's kind of what I do.
That's fun. Hi, Debbie. Thanks for being here. Oh, glad you're enjoying the show. Sharla is fantastic, as you can hear. She's just very accomplished woman and very inspiring. So thanks, Debbie, for being here. So I am curious. You had mentioned that you now get to be an expert witness at times, so the role has switched. So
Yes.
being on that side of being questioned, do you find yourself nervous, or do you anticipate the questions coming? Have there been any surprises that kind of caught you off guard? Tell us a little bit about that experience of having that.
I wouldn't say that I am nervous when I do it because I try to be real prepared in advance. So you typically have some idea of what questions someone ought to ask. They don't always ask the questions I think they ought to ask, but they typically ask on the topics that I anticipate that they would be asking on. I can't say that I've yet been completely surprised by something coming out of left field because most of the topics that I'm talking about are streamlined enough that the people asking the questions are expert in their own right. So it's possible to anticipate what they're going to ask, but you never anticipate everything. And different people have, of course, very different views on the same set of facts. So the people asking the questions sometimes take a very different tack on their approach to the facts than I would if I were the person on their side of the table. So it's really been very interesting. It's a different type of intellectual challenge, and it requires a tremendous amount of preparation. I have a whole new appreciation of my experts and how much work they do behind the scenes to get ready for either a deposition or a trial. I haven't testified live at trial yet. I've had several trial settings, and for one reason or another, either the cases have resolved and gone away, or they've gotten postponed, which we call continued in the profession. But that will happen, and we'll see how that goes. But you always have to be mindful of listening to the question. As I told my witnesses when I was preparing witnesses, listen to the question and answer the question. And that's very hard to do. I find that it's really difficult to not anticipate what they meant to ask because sometimes that's not what they ask, and you don't want to help them. That's not your job. Your job is to answer the question, and once you answer the question, you're supposed to stop. And as you can tell from me, I kind of like to talk, so that's really hard. But if the question calls for a hard stop at the end, then you need to do a hard stop at the end and just sit and wait for them to ask the next one.
That is great. And it sounds like that's something that you can even apply in your personal lives at times, right? And even in business, sometimes we tend to want to say more than necessary. Is Do you find that to be the case? That do you have to remind yourself, just answer the question?
Yes, that's true whether you are being deposed or whether you're having just a random discussion. Often the answer is that it's just whatever the answer is. And as someone told me once, if you find that you're in a hole, rather than keep talking, stop digging. Just stop. Stop's okay.
It's okay to not open your mouth sometimes, right?
That is correct. I worked once with a fascinating older lawyer, and he was older. He was quite old in New York, and he would always say that the advice he gave to his witnesses and his clients was, if you can speak, then speak. If you don't have to speak but can nod, nod. And if you don't have to nod and can wink, just wink. It's always better to wink than to speak. It's like, yeah, that's pretty good advice.
That is. And I believe that's the same thing in real estate, Sometimes some agents get so excited, um, new agents especially, and just run the mouth a little too much, and sometimes it can kill the deal before anybody gets into a contract. And which is why also sellers and buyers, sometimes it's not advisable for them to even meet each other before the transaction is over, because one, seller might be so anxious and just kind of just start talking, and not anything, thinking that it's not anything a big deal, but people can perceive things differently, and interpret things differently. And so it can scare people off. And so, anyways, it is kind of interesting, so I like that you said just answer the question, because I've had to tell myself, just answer the question.
Yeah. It's pretty good advice most of the time. We refer to that as oversharing, and it is a technique that people will use in the law. There are all sorts of techniques to get people to tell you things they didn't really mean to tell you, and I'm sure the same is absolutely true in the world of real estate, because there's probably more information in most transactions that is really relevant to the transaction, but it could run something off the sides in a heartbeat if someone shared it.
Yeah, yeah. It, and and it's interesting too, because for some people they think, well, that's just being deceptive if you're not going to divulge every little detail of whatever it is. But that's not so much that, it's that when you're trying to keep things as objective as possible. Is that really the goal? I mean, I feel like that's kind of how it is in real estate, is that we're just trying to keep it objective, not giving more than is necessary. And it's not that anything's being hidden. It's just that the facts, ma'am, just give me the facts kind of thing.
Yeah, it's that old dragnet slogan, just the facts. All you need to provide are the facts. And that's okay. Uh, because, like you pointed out, being a good fiduciary and being honest doesn't require you to disclose every nit and tittle of everything you know. That's not a reasonable expectation. On the other hand, anything that's material, that's something that needs to be disclosed, and that's true whether you're talking law or real estate or just life. But there are always topics that are not appropriately called for by whatever the question is.
Got it. So as we're kind of talking about this, I was thinking, something that maybe you can ponder on as your next project is, maybe you can develop a course or a webinar to help people practice, just answering the question, because I do believe that is a skill set that has to be developed. It's not, because as a child, you grow up, your mom says, are you telling the truth? Are you, give me everything, so anyways, I think we end up just not tailoring that to the situation. Um and sometimes we can cause more damage than good, even when our intentions are to do good. And I'm saying this because my husband was in law enforcement for um over 8 years. And so, and I just remember him, telling me some of the situations that sometimes you just have to state the facts and know more, because you're really trying to help people out, and sometimes you can do more damage when you talk too much. So anyways, I do believe that is a skill set, and perhaps that's something um, you can take on as a project, because I don't think that that's being discussed too much out there in the business world.
It probably isn't. And you're right. It is a learned skill. And anyone who has ever been in a deposition as a fact witness, if you've been unlucky enough to be deposed or have to be on the stand, because that's not something that people typically do. That's not an ordinary activity for most people. There's always a lot of training that goes on in it, training and preparation. Think about, uh, they ask you, what is your name? You should give them your name, not what is your name? Let me tell you all about my family. And the fact that I've lived here for, 5 generations, that's not really what they're looking for. And we talk about rabbit trails, things that you raise that, again, are not material, and you can do that inadvertently. But you're absolutely right. It is something that people have to practice because it's artificial. That's not how we typically interact with people. In human interactions and in what we think of as social interactions, we want to overshare because we want to build bonds with people. And depending on your business circumstance or your legal circumstance, you're not really looking to build a bond with someone. You're looking to exchange information, and that's a different approach, and it's a very different skill.
Well, I'm glad you gave that distinction, because we don't want to just go around just short answers, right, to our friends and our
No.
families, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems impersonal then, like you said, it's a different situation. So
It is.
I appreciate that. That's great. So, what is the number one thing that someone can do to improve their business and life right now? What would be that one thing that you would say someone should do?
Well, it's hard to say that in the abstract. On the other hand, I think the best thing that someone can do is do what I did, sit down and evaluate what you're doing and decide, is this what I want to be doing? Is this still what I want to be doing? I loved being a trial lawyer until I didn't. I loved traveling until I didn't. And it's okay to say, that has been fabulous, but I'm ready to do something different. But in order to do that, you have to be very honest with yourself, and you have to evaluate why it is that you want to make a change, because change is difficult. No matter how much you are ready for it and how excited you are about it, there's still always angst and there's transition. So you need to be realistic with yourself. But the biggest thing you can do to benefit yourself is to identify what it is you ought to be doing, that you want to be doing, and find a way to do it. And you sort of have to work backwards. Identify what it is that you want to do, and then figure out how you get there. You can't go in and quit your job tomorrow because you want to suddenly be an expert witness if no one is going to hire you as an expert witness. So if that's what you want to do, then you need to work towards that as a goal and set timelines for yourself. Because if you, at least in my life, if it isn't on the calendar, it isn't going to happen. And that's certainly true in the legal profession. I think it's true for most people. So you need a deadline for yourself. If you want to do something different, what is your 6-month plan? What are you going to do? Who are you going to meet? Who are you going to call? What are you going to learn to do that you don't know how to do today? And how are you going to be prepared so that 6 months from now, when you walk into your boss or your partner or whatever and say, great news, I'm doing something new, you have the ability to do it.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. That's very great advice. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, Sharla, how would they do that?
Well, my website is almost finished. I didn't follow my advice on that, by the way. I should have had that done quite some time ago. But I've been working with Jill and Ken Walls, and we've almost got that one ready to launch. But my email address is really easy. It's Sharla at sharlafrost.com. So you can reach me there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find. So anyone who wants to talk with me can find me there. My books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, so those are also easy to find. I suggest for people who are interested in potentially talking with me about business development that they pick up a copy of the book and read it first. It has worksheets, so you have some time to do some of that thinking about where you're going to be and how to get there thing, so that we could then have a conversation that is useful to them rather than just purely hypothetical, because they'll be further along in the process. And if they want me to come speak, I love a captive audience. I loved picking juries because I was in front of people who couldn't get away from me. So that was fun. Enjoyed that. But you can reach me at sharlafrost@gmail.com or at sharla@sharlafrost.com, either one.
Okay, great. Oh my goodness, you are a very well accomplished lady. I'm so glad to have certainly met you. So as you are basically retooling, and you are still investing in yourself in many ways, and not very many people do this. This must be why your friends have told you that you are failing at retirement, because you're still going
That too.
and
Yeah.
doing things that people who aren't retired are doing. So tell us why that's so important to continue that.
I think that once you stop learning, you stop living. So I am very committed to the concept of learning things that I don't know. Uh, and social media is something that I have sort of a passing acquaintance with. But since I didn't grow up with it, as children do now, the only way to really sort of conquer that is to learn it. And I don't expect to ever sit down and do nothing. So if I want to do writing or speaking or any of those things, those are different than the work I've done over the last 40 something years. So it's important to learn how to do those. Those are all different businesses. And I think that in order to be competent at it, I need to learn how to do it. So yeah, I'm investing in myself. I've taken classes. I'm working with some business advisors. I'm doing a lot of things, and I'm fortunate to be healthy and still able to do it. But I suspect that however long I have left, I will continue to do that. I like to learn. I was always a good student, and I did pass up the opportunity to go back to school and get another degree because I thought that probably wasn't all that practical. But I think it's important. You learn from others and you grow from meeting new people. You know, I met you, so we discovered we had some Oklahoma connections in common, and we have a common view of how you become successful. So just because you've been successful in one career doesn't mean you can't be successful in another. I like the challenge.
What a wonderful example you are. And just keep up the great work, Sharla, and keep trailblazing, because it is an inspiration to so many. This is really, you really are an American dream maker. You're living the dream, and you're also helping others to achieve it. And so I definitely applaud you for not just, taking the easy ride, but yet still feeling like there is a sense of purpose that you have, and you have a lot to give. And we can hear that today. And I love that you're able to share that. So thank you once again for taking time out of your busy schedule. We loved having you here today, Charlotte, and we wish you all the best. You guys get on to Amazon and order Sharla's books. Her books. She is a great writer, so she's got some great information. Power at the Table, and also her Frogville 3 series, right? 3
Frogville Quest series, yeah.
Frogville Quest series.
Quest,
Okay,
yeah.
Quest,
They're
and they're
fairy
all.
tales, yeah. Fairy tales with a female protagonist. So,
Ooh,
we go,
well,
yeah.
that's great. So definitely get on there. And then if you watch this on the replay, please go ahead and share it. Charlotte has a great message to send out there. So we just thank you again. And I will talk to you a little bit later, Charlotte. Have a great day.
Thank you, Zena. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter to you as well. Bye. Thank you guys so much for tuning in today. What a wonderful woman Charlotte is. And so, yes, please get on here and share away. It will help her so much. And just because she's retired doesn't mean she wants to sit and do nothing, as you can hear. So she wants to touch the world and impact the world. So let's help her out. Okay. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful, blessed day. We will be back actually, we won't be back next Wednesday because I will be out of town. But we'll be back in a couple of weeks, and I have some very special guests lined up for that. So don't miss the American Dream Makers. If you have not become an American Dream Makers, if you have not joined the group page, please do so. I'm also on Facebook as Zena Krogadal, also on YouTube and LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect with you as well. So have a wonderful day, and I will say God bless and goodbye.